Thank you, everyone, for joining me. Nice to have you this morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you happen to be coming from. For those who do not know me yet, my name is Ron Levine from Mindfulness and Blue Jeans. Some of you have heard this before. I fell ass backwards into mindfulness and insight meditation almost 25 years ago during a time when I was dealing with clinical depression and anxiety and a raging panic disorder, which had blown up into agoraphobia. So I was unable to leave the house. I was unable to work. I was on disability. Couldn't go past the front door without having a meltdown. And happened to get paired up with a psychologist who, even back in 1998, was already several decades deep into teaching and practicing mindfulness and insight meditation. And he offered me some of these tools and techniques to deal with the issues that I was facing at the time. And I was not impressed with his suggestion. I was unable to work. I was unable to leave the house. And here's this guy saying, let's watch the breathing for a while. Okay. So I figured I'm sitting at home all day anyway. It's all he gave me. I'll give it a good, honest shot just so I can go back to him and say, look, this didn't work. Can I have the real treatment now? Almost 25 years on, I haven't had that conversation with him, and now I'm doing stuff like this. And here we are. Today I want to talk about forgiveness. This is the first time I've done this one virtually. Usually, when I'm doing this session, I've got a bunch of people sitting in a room and a bunch of chairs, and I say, okay, could you do me a favor and just raise your hand if you've ever been in a situation, maybe you're currently in a situation where you are having trouble forgiving somebody. And given the nature of the topic, pretty invariably, every hand in the room goes up. And then I say, okay, now please keep your hand raised if the person that you've been having difficulty forgiving is sitting in your chair right now. And pretty invariably, every hand stays up. I bring this up because there's a classic saying in spiritual circles that the way we do anything is the way we do everything. Our ability to forgive others, I have found in my experience, is a pretty accurate reflection of our ability to forgive ourselves. Something to keep in mind as we go through this. And it also drives home one of the profound, I don't know if ironies is quite the right term, but there's a significant kind of catch-22 when it comes to forgiveness. Forgiveness implies some form of betrayal. Some form of betrayal has happened. Some transgression. Somebody's done something that we trusted them not to do, either implicitly or explicitly. And there are a couple of things that really drive up the intensity of the perception of the betrayal. One of them, of course, is whatever the action was. But the other one is the closeness of that relationship. The closer the relationship, the more deeply we feel this breaking of the trust. And therefore, the harder it can become to forgive. So what does this mean when the person who we may feel betrayed by, person we may feel who's untrustable, is us? It doesn't get any closer than that, does it? So there's a real challenge in dealing with forgiveness in that the closer the relationship, the harder the whole ball of wax seems to become, doesn't it? And the overarching question that we end up coming up against is, how do I forgive this person? Whether it's us or somebody else. How do I forgive this person? A couple of sessions ago, I did a whole thing on judgment. And one of the things I talked about is, how do we judge skillfully? And one of the ways that I offered that has helped me a lot over the years is not to think about judging people, we judge actions. Likewise, I've come to the realization for myself, at least at this point in my practice, we don't forgive people. We forgive actions. There's a big difference there. Now, what's funny about this comparison with the judging and the forgiveness is in spiritual circles, judging is often considered bad, right? And that's what the whole thing a couple of weeks ago was about. Judging's this bad thing, right? But forgiveness, oh, that's good. You're supposed to forgive, right? Very spiritual. Got to forgive. You let everything go, right? But even though forgiveness is, good, we can't decide to forgive. We can't force ourselves to forgive. And this goes back to another recent session about serenity now. You can't force serenity. You can't force relaxation. It doesn't make any sense, right? And we can't make a decision like, I'm going to forgive that person or that action now. Bang, done, right? It doesn't really work that way. It's another one of those instances that I talk about a lot where we're trying to use our intellect to direct our emotion. And that doesn't really work very well. If it did, none of us would be here talking and listening about this right now, I don't think. At least I wouldn't have much to talk about. So we can't just decide and say, I'm doing that now. What we can do is set the conditions for forgiveness to arise in the same way that we can set the conditions for, say, serenity to arise, for relaxation to arise. We set conditions. Last time, we talked about the two pillars of meditation, of this practice, of insight. Pillars of wisdom and compassion. These two pieces that work together in tandem that ultimately can lead us to liberation from suffering, which of course is what the Buddha taught. It's all the Buddha taught. That's what I study. That's where this comes from. How do we alleviate our own suffering? So what's wisdom in this case of forgiveness? Now, I can't give you wisdom, but I can share some of what I have found for myself. Maybe as a bit of a roadmap, maybe things to keep an eye out for, maybe a shift in perspective. And we'll take this into a practice in a little bit, of course. This practice is all about clear seeing. Wisdom comes from clear seeing about ourselves, our motivations, our reactions, how they drive each other, and about our relationship with the world and how it reacts and responds to things, including us. Developing that clear seeing about these relationships. What I would call the most critical piece of wisdom that I have found for myself in my practice as it relates to forgiveness is really genuinely seeing that nothing anybody does has anything to do with me. It's about them. What do I mean by this? I said what I just said once in one of these, and somebody said, well, wait a minute. If somebody deliberately tries to hurt me or does hurt me, that's about me. It feels that way, doesn't it? If we think about it, though, whatever somebody is doing is coming from a place of intention. And as people, and not just people, what is our central overarching intention at all times? How do I gain happiness and avoid pain, right? So I said to her, if somebody tries to hurt you or does hurt you, it's not about your feelings. It's about theirs. It's not about hurting you. To them, it's how do I think I'll feel if I hurt that person? they're seeking happiness in a really unskillful way. Intention is the central pillar of karma. Not the Western, revenge-based karma, justice, what goes around comes around, he's going to get his in the end. And not that. Buddhist karma. Cause and effect. Our experience in the here and now. If somebody is seeking happiness by causing pain for somebody else, that's not a pleasant place to be. If that's the best you got, are you operating from a place of clear seeing? Are you operating from a place of peace? Probably not. And that mindset leading to that action perpetuates the continuation of that mindset, because happiness isn't going to be found that way. That's just going to continue the cycle of misery. The karmic effect is that the actions and the thoughts that lead to the actions that lead to the thoughts continue this cycle of misery. And that's where this is really coming from. An attempt to escape that in a way that just ain't going to work. Now, we want to make it about us, don't we? And of course we do. Because we are the star of this life story, right? We are each the star of our life story. So when somebody does something, well, it's about me. I talked a few weeks ago about the fundamental attribution error from psychology, the thing that says we tend to overestimate our intentions and our actions as coming from external factors, and we overestimate other people's actions and intentions coming from internal factors. So if I do something that's mean and unskillful, it's because, well, this person did that and I'm having a bad day, and I'm a victim of circumstance. If that guy over there does something nasty to me, it's because he's an asshole. Right? These are the mental shortcuts we make. And of course we do. I mean, this goes back to our survival days out in the African savannah. We need to make sure we stay safe, right? So something we feel is threatening us, yeah, of course we're going to make it about us. But is that clear seeing? Or are we taking a whole chunk of the puzzle away? All these other causes and effects, again, karma, internal and external causes and effects. Are we kind of ignoring all that and say, no, that person's an asshole and he hurt me and it's about me? Now, this is not an attempt to try to use logic to talk ourselves out of feeling a certain way. That's not the point here. You can try it if you want. I've never found it to work. This is simply so that we can see more clearly. Even if it doesn't necessarily make us feel better, I'd still rather be seeing clearly and not feel great about something than to be delusional about something and not feel great about it. So at least let's get the clear seeing to a better place. But there's still another pillar, isn't there? There's the wisdom, but there's also the compassion. The same way that what other people do is really about them and not about us. How we deal with it, up to and including our capacity to forgive, has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with us. The classic example I always give. Imagine you're walking down the street and you see some stranger and you go walking up to him and you flip him the bird. You're probably not going to get the most pleasant reaction. In fact, you might have to run for your life. Now, let's say you went to go visit the Dalai Lama and you flipped him off. I don't know what kind of reaction you're going to get, but I bet it's going to be very different, and I bet you're not going to have to run. Same finger. Two very different reactions. It has nothing to do with the finger, does it? So it's not just about the wisdom of seeing clearly, but also the compassion. What I have found is that the aspects of the wisdom I was just talking about, the clear seeing of the cause and effect, even if we don't know all of the causes behind whatever this perceived transgression was, we know everything is a result of causes and effects. This is what the Buddha called conditioned existence. This is why I'm always saying, how do we work through something? We set conditions. We're changing causes so we get better effects. What I have found is, as I gain clear seeing and recognize at a deep level, not at just an intellectual level, okay, yes, I understand what somebody does is about, no, when you really spend some time with it, we begin to see those same things as they play out inside of ourselves. We begin to recognize, oh, you know what? I've wanted to hurt people. Why did I do it? Because I thought it'd make me feel better. And how'd that work out for me? You're not so good. Is it a pleasant state of mind? No, it wasn't. And did I want to hurt somebody because I was an asshole? Maybe. But there were some other factors too, right? And I remember one of my breakthroughs with this was in one particular time when I was, again, like I mentioned earlier, it's very difficult when we're dealing with people closer to us, right? Harder to forgive, deeper betrayal, and so forth. So I remember dealing with something like this at one point with a very close family member. And one of my real breakthroughs was when I just kind of realized, holy shit, how much pain must he have been feeling that he felt the best thing he could do was this, that, and the other thing in order to gain a little relief, to find a little happiness, to try to find peace. Never mind the fact that it wouldn't work. How much suffering do you have to experience to be in a place where you feel like that's the best option? And that's when the compassion really just, like, man, that sucks. And that's something that we can recognize in ourselves because we all experience that. We all experience that. The Buddha was teaching this stuff 2,500 years ago, and a lot of it wasn't new then. And is it any less applicable today? No. And has any human ever not experienced something? No. No. When we recognize these things in ourselves, as well as the challenge of negotiating these selves in a world full of other selves trying to make those same negotiations, we're not so different. Not so different. I have found that when I have that clear seeing, compassion can't help but arise. And when that kind of compassion arises with that clear seeing as its base, forgiveness, it just kind of unfolds, not necessarily right away, not necessarily all at once. But again, we don't have a choice about that. We don't have a choice how and when forgiveness may arise any more than we can dictate relaxation or serenity or any of these other things. Most of our problems arise from attempting to force those very things, finding it's not working and then trying harder, which is just another cycle of suffering. Again, that's another form of karma right there, generating our own suffering by trying to find happiness in a way that isn't skillful and not seeing that. So we're going to practice this a little bit in a moment, but there are a couple of things that really need to be mentioned about forgiveness in general before we get there. Who is forgiveness for? Forgiveness is not for the person whose action we may or may not be forgiving. Forgiveness is for us. We're not saying that action was okay. That's not what forgiveness is. Not say, okay, what you did was fine. No. What forgiveness is saying, I am no longer tied to you in such a way because you owe me for that thing you did. It's to free us. It's not about letting somebody off the hook. So it's saying, I am no longer tied to that thing. I do not require payback or whatever the hell. I am now freed of that. That does not necessarily mean that, okay, now we're just best friends and we go off into the sunset. And the picture that I put up for today's event was a picture of a couple of dogs around a rainbow. And I said I would explain why I put that picture up. The way my own teacher said it a number of years ago, and it wasn't until just recently, by the way, I recognized there was a pretty clever little pun in here that I don't even know if he intended at the time. But he said, forgiveness isn't all puppies and rainbows. It's actually a lot bitchier than that. Because we're saying, okay, you know what? I'm no longer tied to you for this. And in some cases, okay, I'm going off on my way now. And we don't need to see each other again. Sometimes that's the way it'll be. So forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean that now you have to be best friends with this person. You may, but that's not part of that's not within the scope of forgiveness. It's not what it's about. And there is one other thing that I want to mention about forgiveness, and this is one straight from me. This is straight from me. This is one I found for myself and I still deal with, particularly when it comes to the self-forgiveness, even more than the other people forgiveness, okay? There can be this fear of forgiveness. This fear that, well, geez, if I fucked this thing up and I forgive myself for it, I run the risk of fucking it up again. I can't forgive myself because I need to make sure that thing never happens again. I need to make sure I'm safe. I need to make sure I'm okay. And I can't allow any risk to that. There can be no vulnerability to that kind of threat from me inside. So no, I'm not going to forgive that to make goddamn sure I don't ever let myself, even by accident. That comes under the heading of those things that is well-intentioned and not skillful. Well-intentioned and not skillful. Coming from a place of fear. It's especially sneaky because of the cycle that it sets up. Because if we don't make the fuck up again, what's the logic there? Oh, it must have worked. I haven't forgiven myself. I haven't fucked the thing up again. It's working. Keep doing that. And it's really not necessary. There's forgiving and then there's forgetting, right? We can forgive, but still retain whatever you want to call it, the lessons, the wisdom of whatever it was, such that we are skillfully maintaining safety or what have you, without causing ourselves, again, suffering. Again, it's this karmic cycle. In the interest of not fucking the thing up, we cause ourselves all of this suffering. And we feel like that's necessary. And it's not. It's not. But we need to see that process playing out first. Let's practice that a bit. If you are sitting, have your hips elevated a little higher than your knees, which is good for your breathing as well as your posture. If you are not able to have your hips elevated higher than your knees right now, not a big deal. Something to keep in mind for next time, perhaps. And I always like to begin by imagining that I am suspended from the ceiling by a string attached to the top of my head. It's a nice cue for sitting up straight without adding any extra tension. As I mentioned earlier, we can't force ourselves to relax. So if you are feeling some tension right now, let it be tension. We don't have to do anything about it. I also like to notice what is in contact with the floor or the chair. So I get a sense of grounding. There is something supporting us, and we can allow it to do so. So let's take a moment to notice that grounding at the bottom. Even if it doesn't happen to feel particularly stable at the moment, just whatever's there, whatever you got, whatever is happening, noticing that. And also noticing the gentle lift at the top. And whatever else we may be noticing in these first stages of practice in between the two. And if you haven't already, you may start to begin to bring your attention to your breathing. And very often, the first thing we notice when we bring our attention to our breathing is we start to change the breathing, start to shape the breathing. We don't have to do that here. Our meditative breath right now is simply the breath as it's happening, and we're watching it as it unfolds however it is. It may be long, it may be short, it may be deep, it may be shallow. It may change from one breath to the next. It may feel pleasant, it may feel unpleasant. Right now, it's less about all of those characteristics, whatever they happen to be, and more about simply noticing them as they are. Can we make that our only job for the next few moments? Can we keep it just that simple? If you're finding that You are so accustomed to controlling the breathing that you're not sure how not to, which was certainly an issue of mine for quite some time during my early practice. That's fine. Notice that. Notice how you're shaping the breathing, how you're controlling the breathing. You don't need to try to force it to stop. Another karmic cycle of trying to control your controlling, right? Don't have to do that. Notice whatever is unfolding with the breathing right now. And if controlling is part of it, okay. Notice it. Can we keep it just that simple? Just the noticing. Now, when I teach, I normally work with what's here now. I don't typically ask people to try to dredge up memories and emotions in the interest of working with them. But for today's topic, if you are dealing with a forgiveness challenge right now, I'd like to offer something. My own teacher shared something with me a number of years ago about an experience he had with a client who was having a great deal of difficulty dealing with something that someone had done to her. And apparently she had already gone to a psychologist or two, a couple of professionals, and by the time she came to see my teacher, she kind of had enough of all that. And when she met with him, the first thing she said was, "Look, I am not forgiving this person." And he said, "Okay, that's fine. I'm not here to tell you to forgive anybody." And the walls started to come down. It's like, oh, we fall into this trap again of this, oh, I should forget. You're supposed to forget. Spiritual. We fall into this and we put this pressure on ourselves that, okay, I have to forget. We try to talk ourselves into forgetting. Does that work? No, it doesn't work. Of course it doesn't work. And what happens when it doesn't work? We try harder. All right, so I'm not ready to forgive this thing, that thing. That can just be a statement of fact, not some kind of judgment. I'm not ready to do that. Okay. It's a good thing to recognize. That's something to see. That's something to be aware of. That is something to let it be as it is. So what do we do with that while we're letting it be as it is? Well, in my experience, we make some space for the resistance that we are feeling to that perceived transgression. And when I say a perceived transgression, I don't mean that it didn't happen. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I mean, how many times have we thought somebody did something that they had, I had no idea, I'm so sorry. But no, we instantly jump to that conclusion because it's about us, right? So perceived transgression may have happened, may not have happened. Maybe it was something deliberate, maybe it wasn't something deliberate. But whatever that thing was, there's a significant reaction within us happening based upon it. That's something for us to check out. That's something that we can make space for. That's something that we can breathe into. That, my friends, that is spiritual practice. Not the spiritual bypassing horseshit of, I need to forgive, I always forgive, I have a forgive, I forgive. No. That's trying to leap to the end of the path without walking it. Walking the path is, all right, what's actually here? What's the felt process? What's the thought process? How are they playing off of each other? Where's it showing up in my body? How's it affecting my breathing? How's it affecting my seeing? Mental seeing or physical seeing, by the way. I have certainly noticed when my mental seeing gets clouded, it feels like I'm experiencing tunnel vision, like actually through my physical eyesight. So if we're not ready to forgive something, I don't see that as a problem. I mean, we can make it a problem. It's not going to help. It's simply where we are in the process at that given time. And because it is a process, we can watch it unfold without interference. Just like we're practicing watching the breathing unfold without interference. If we can learn to watch the breathing unfold without interference, the breathing, I mean, what's more critical to our survival than that? If we can work with our breathing, that's always here and so critical, and we can allow that to unfold under the light of our attention, we can do that with a lot of other things as well. Like watching how a process of forgiveness might unfold. Making space for the process of whatever is in the way of that forgiveness to express itself. Now, if you are working with an emotionally charged scenario, of course, it's very easy to fall into the storylines of it and get swept away and lose the breathing and spin off and catch ourselves. Either because I start talking or you catch yourself, or we come back to the breathing and get re-anchored. And we get a little bit better with practice, noticing how that process happens of getting lost in the storylines and getting ourselves worked up. And start to perhaps see what's behind that karmic cycle, that suffering that we're causing for ourselves. Because that's all just virtual reality, isn't it? Even if there was a deliberate transgressive event, the constant replaying of it, well, that's just suffering. That's mental time travel. At some level, we think it's going to help, which is why we do it. That's why we need to bring clear seeing to the process. So we can really see at a felt level. Because I can sit here and say it doesn't help, and I think everyone here probably already knows that. But until we really see it at a felt experiential level, we keep doing it. So we watch that process unfold again and again so that we become disenchanted, disillusioned. We won't fall for it quite as much. Start to unravel our own karmic cycle of suffering. Which is doing what? Setting new conditions. We're changing the conditions to get better effects. Those two pillars, wisdom and compassion, we set the conditions for them to arise. We can't force them, right? And we don't have to go looking for them either. They're already here. They're always here. We're setting the conditions by seeing how we're getting in their way. We're simply clearing the path for them. Deciding to join us here today was planting a karmic seed. It was a change in a condition. And being here with us now is watering that seed. And continuing the practice. It's giving it sunlight. But like with any plant, we can set all the conditions, but we don't get to say how or when things grow. There's a point at which interference works against the process. All we can really do is observe and watch the effects that come out of the causes that we set. So we're setting conditions for wisdom, compassion, forgiveness, and we watch and learn about the process as it unfolds. So we can jump into some Q&A, some discussion. Hi, Christine.
I understand it's more about forgiving yourself. I guess that, like forgiving yourself for letting someone else's actions or deeds or words or whatever interfere with your calmness or sense of peace. Or I think that's what you're getting at. I mean, I do understand like forgiving yourself. And I've managed to do that with certain other people where, because I love them and their friendship is more important than whatever they did or happened. You just say, I don't know, it's just natural. I just was brought up that way. You just let it go. Or is this more about just, I don't know, the whole forgiving yourself? Is it like to forgive yourself for your reaction? Like, I think you know that I've been really angry towards a lot of people during COVID who I feel are doing harmful things to the rest of the world. So do I need to forgive myself for feeling that anger? Because it's not healthy. It's not healthy. I don't like feeling this way. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Each one of us would have to figure out what it is we think we need to forgive ourselves for. If we're going to feel like we need to forgive something, there needs to be a level of intention and volition, control behind whatever that action was. Can we control our reactions? Not really. I mean, I make a distinction between reaction and response.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's like that distinction that I make between pain and suffering. In Buddhism, we talk about suffering, and sometimes I forget to clarify these things. And so, by suffering, I don't mean pain. And where I draw the distinction is choice. If somebody punches us in the arm, we're probably going to feel pain. We don't have a choice about that. If we sit and stew about it for the next 2 weeks, we got a choice about that. That's the line. So I make the same distinction between reaction and response. Do we choose our reaction? No. By definition, the thing that happens immediately without conscious decision, that's reaction. How we then work with it once we have perceived, I'm having this reaction, that's response. Holding ourselves accountable, if you will, in such a way that we need to be forgiven for our reactions, using my terminology, is kind of the same thing as saying, I need to hold myself accountable in such a way that I would need to forgive myself for feeling pain if somebody punches me in the arm. It just doesn't make any sense. And it's a form of suffering. Now, if we want to work on our suffering, that's a different story. Now we have some volition. Now we have some control. And if that's an area that we want to work on, which presumably all of us do because we're here, then we find ways to work with that, like some of what we just did, and certainly any number of other techniques. We can do that without blaming ourselves for having felt a certain way. But even more important than that, if we do feel a certain way, and we feel that we shouldn't feel that way, even that we can simply watch as a process. That's still a process. All we're talking about is feelings about feelings. So we're taking a feeling that we're having without choice that's painful, and we are adding suffering on top of that by saying, I shouldn't be feeling this. Feelings just are. I have not found it skillful to hold myself accountable for feeling a certain way. I do hold myself accountable for how I work with that, which is where this practice comes in. This is why I do all this. And I continue to do it because I find that it works. An extra piece of good news that I have found surprising and very motivational is that those areas where we don't have control, pain, reaction, those things where by definition I say we don't have control, I have found we don't have direct control. Because what I have found is when I work with the pieces where I do have control long enough, they start to seep into those areas that I don't have direct control. By working with my suffering around, say, physical pain for so long, my relationship with physical pain, even though I don't have direct access to change that, has changed. As just one example, I am a lifelong needle phobe who, at age 41, got a tattoo. What? If you had asked me at any point, my first 40 years, would you ever get oh, fuck, no. What are you, how long have you known me? Stuff like that. I have also found that by working with my responses, my reactions end up changing. It's a really, really nice side effect to this. But again, you don't get to say when or how. It just unfolds. A long way of saying, if you are feeling certain things, you're feeling them. If you're going to hold yourself accountable for feeling them such that you feel like you have to be forgiven for feeling them, I never found a way to make that work. I found a lot of suffering there. We have feelings that we feel like we shouldn't. Whether because we have a spiritual practice or it's just inappropriate or whatever. And you know what? That's not going to stop. I found it became a lot easier to work with feelings when I said, okay, what is it? What is it? And what is my secondary feeling about it? Okay. And what's my tertiary feeling about the secondary? And we just kind of see how it just ripples out and out and out. It's like, oh, that's suffering. That's suffering. And who's doing that? Son of a bitch. I'm doing it. I'm doing it. And I didn't even know it. But now I see it. Now I see it happening. Now I see it happening. And now that I see it happening, now what do I do with it? Oh, okay, then we'll figure that out next. But let's just watch it for a bit and see. Without saying this should be happening and that shouldn't be happening. Those are suffering lines of thinking. This needs to be like that. This can't be this way. What is it? Just what is it? If we can bring that level of curiosity and openness to the process, just as it is, that's when things start to unravel. Unravel in a good way. They start to tease apart. And we find that these things like the you don't have to forgive that. This is when the wisdom and the compassion, those two pillars, now they have a chance to arise because they're not getting in the fucking way. We're not getting in the way. Does that help?
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, dear.
Thank you. Cheers.
Yeah.
Hi, Francine.
Okay, one of the things sitting with for a long time, over years and years and years of practice, a lot of times what comes up is a very physical response. So I'll like burst into tears or I'll start shaking. It's definitely a good thing because, it's a catharsis. Sometimes that can sneak up on you. The response can be scary.
That's great. Thank you. Yes. There are stories of people who have gotten on their yoga mat and gotten into just the right pose at just the right time, and the waterworks start, and they just didn't even expect it. And it's because all of these things do have a physical component. One of the techniques that I use a lot, both when I'm sitting as well as when I'm teaching, is, where is this particular feeling expressing itself physically? Where are you feeling this physically? All of this stuff is stored somewhere in there. In the West, we think of the mind and body as two separate things, and good luck with
Not
that.
a chance.
Yeah. I know this intimately because of my background and the kind of person I am. I spent many of my early years in this practice focusing solely above the jawline. And my current teacher, back when we first started working together years ago, in some ways were very, very similar. In some ways were very, very opposite, which is extremely handy. And one of the ways we're opposite, he's like, hey, dude, you have a whole body under the jawline. Do you know that? You want to work with that a little bit? It's like, it's a very astute observation. When we start to break some of these things apart, physical stuff's going to happen. Physical stuff is going to happen. And sometimes that can be scary and disconcerting, particularly at first. But it becomes a sign of, we begin to recognize it as the sign of progress that it is.
That's exactly what it feels like. It's like a signpost. It's so like, okay, that's something coming into play.
It is. Yeah, it absolutely is. When I first started practicing, I was so accustomed to controlling my breathing because with years of dealing with panic disorder, I was always controlling my breathing very deliberately. Yeah. And when I first started this practice, it was terrifying to me to think about not controlling the breathing. And we talk about not trusting yourself. I mean, I didn't trust my mind or my body at this point. But I started to do it. I was like, okay, I'm going to, breathing, don't fuck me over. I'm going to let you do it. I'm okay. And when I started doing it, I felt this pulsation, this really strong pulsation right in the solar plexus. And it was really frightening. Not because it was painful, but because it was like, okay, there's a shift happening here in the breathing doing. I was like, oh shit, okay. And I remember for the first couple of months that I was doing this practice like that, I felt that. And I slowly started to realize, oh, okay, this sensation is happening, but I'm still here. I'm still okay. And geez, you know what? This sensation, as novel and disconcerting as it kind of is, only seems to happen when I'm watching the breathing and letting it just be. So I started to take that as a sign of progress, like, oh, okay, when I'm feeling this, I'm on the right path. Mm-hmm. And it actually started to take on a positive sort of connotation. It's really important to notice that stuff and to integrate it and to see them as the signposts that they are.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Pleasure.
Cheers. I don't think it was Amy herself, but I think it was Amy's +1 who had her hand up, because I recognize Amy's face from many of these before, but not the +1. So Amy's
the
friend.
+1 is Amy's mommy.
Hi, Amy's mommy. How are you? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Oh, we've got Amy's whole family.
Yeah, we got Amy's and my baby.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, the question
We all need it.
The question I had was, as we were going through this process, which I enjoyed and got a lot out of,
sure,
I find less reasons to forgive. I'm finding more reasons not to forgive. Maybe I'm going to put it in that way. More things were coming out about certain situations, and it's making me angrier instead of more peaceful. I'm really trying to be forgiving in a couple of circumstances, but as I think, and while we were quiet, more things seem to be exploding in my head. So I don't know where to go with that. I don't know if I could find this forgiveness.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That's a great question. The things that are exploding that you think are getting in the way of your forgiveness are the process of forgiveness. You are so focused on I need to forgive that those things are not being allowed to express themselves. And genuine forgiveness is not going to arise if they don't get their say. We have a whole bunch of different voices inside of us, right? We got the voice that wants this and the voice that wants that and the voice that wants that. And we're all around a conference table. And what we consider to be, us, me, Amy's mom, me.
Barbara.
Barbara. We consider that me to be the one kind of in charge of the whole meeting. Like we're running the meeting, right? And all these voices at the meeting, they're all us. And some of them are bringing up some crazy shit and they're saying stuff that we know is not logical. But every one of them just wants us to be happy. But each one of them only has a tiny view into the big picture. And that's why they don't have the clear seeing to be able to understand why, well, this isn't a logical course of action and that's not a skillful thing to do. They don't get. We can see that if we have the clear seeing because we're at a high enough level. But imagine that you are having a meeting with a bunch of people on a daily or a weekly basis, and there are some people in that meeting who have something to say, and you don't let them say it. And then they come back day after day because they have to. They have to come back day after day, week after week, and whatever this thing is, it's continued that this thing they need to talk about because they're not having a chance to talk about it. It's only becoming more and more urgent to them. And you're saying, no, you can't talk. They're just going to keep coming back and trying to scream louder.
I know.
That's what these voices are. And we don't want to hear them. We don't want to hear them. And we tell them, no, shut up. Shut up. And then we wonder why we don't have this feeling of cohesion. And it's because there are some parts of us which may not be rational because we have many parts of us that aren't rational. But they need to be heard, though. If we don't experience the fear or the anger, again, it goes back to what Francine says. Imagine this is somewhere in your body physically, because it is.
It is.
And imagine we are not letting that process. So imagine you felt a pain somewhere from something in your body, and pain is a process because it arises and it does some stuff. Your body, your immune system, things happen. And eventually what happens? Well, the pain goes away. Well, why does it go away? Because it got processed. When we catch a cold, imagine if our immune system didn't do anything. Well, we would have the cold forever because in this case, forever, we would die from it. So there's a process of it working through so it can go.
Process. That's
what this is. Because you gave space for these things to arise, that need to arise, that need to process, guess what? They did. That was the point here. They did. You had progress. What you are feeling as a hindrance was the exact progress that we are setting the conditions for. This is one of those situations where it needs to feel worse before it feels better.
Yeah.
So what you experienced is not a hindrance. What you experienced is the process unfolding. So what do you do now? Well, and take this as good news or bad news. You still have more to unfold. So let it. We want so badly to get the thing done that we do that interference and we try to force that through. And one of the traps you may fall into now, and I say this as someone who falls into it, one of the traps you may fall into now is, oh, okay, so this is success then. This is progress. So here's what I need to do then. I need to sit so that I can get all the shit out. So let's do that. I'm going to sit and get all the shit out so I can get it done. You know, and that's one of those, that's one of the next traps to keep an eye out for, is that, oh, okay, so now I can just use the practice to get where I want it to get to. So let's get her done. It's like, yeah, that's not going to work. It's a matter of doing less, not more. You got where you got today because you were doing less. You were making space for things to unfold instead of trying to forgive. You were doing less.
Yeah, makes sense. Yes, it makes sense.
So you're going to need a little more time with that. A little more time doing less and allowing these things to express. And it may not always feel good. This is why I call my practice mindfulness in blue jeans. This is a blue collar practice. We're going to get dirty. This is not, we're sitting off on some sunset mountaintop with our bowl of kale and everything's peaceful and everything, and we're just incredibly, this is not that. That's bullshit. This is not that. This is the spiritual path. Sometimes it's pleasant. Sometimes it's not. And usually to get to the pleasant, we got to go through some of the stuff that's not. That's where you are right now. And as my teacher sometimes says to me in a very loving way, you're in a great place.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's interesting.
So,
thank you.
Cheers for that. Thank you. Hi, Lawrence.
Hi, thank you very much for that. It was a very interesting and very helpful. You mentioned that, and I think that that's really true, that resonates a lot, that what oftentimes prevents us from forgiving ourselves is the fear that we will do that again, right? But it's exactly the same thing for what prevents us from forgiving others. We fear that if we somehow hold them accountable for what happened, which is basically not forgiving, then there is a higher chance that it doesn't happen again, or we get in a fight, I don't know. So I think that what oftentimes prevents us from forgiving others, gets a lot in the way, is fear. As usual, fear is usually the cause of a lot of problems, right? Anger, whatever. And so, of course, I'm trying to identify, which is probably bad because it's control, right? As I'm trying to, all right, how can I avoid that fear? One thing that I struggle to reconcile is, how do you skillfully set boundaries? Because oftentimes you don't have a choice. You can't, it's a coworker or family or whatever, fleeing the person is not a good idea. So, and I think for me, at least, I know one of my trouble is skillfully setting boundaries. And it seems to me that if I had an idea, if I could see how I could do that, then I would be less fearful of letting go of the anger for this or this person, etc., etc.
One of the questions that I get a lot is, how will I know what the right thing to do is at any given time? That's not an answerable question because we don't know all of the permutations of everything that could ever happen. And this is why we do a practice like this on a regular basis. If we only come to a practice like this at the precise moment when we feel like we need it, then it's like going into a weightlifting competition without ever going to the gym first. So this is why we do a regular practice of honing our skills of clear seeing, of compassion, and so forth, so that when life circumstances do arise, we have a better chance of knowing what is the skillful action in that particular moment for that particular circumstance. Boundaries come under that category for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is because not only is every situation different, But what is an appropriate boundary at a given time may change, even within that particular relationship or what have you. So obviously, I can't say what is right for a particular person at a particular time. And what I can say is this practice is really about cause and effect and observing how they interact. And why I say that is because the Buddha was very scientific. It's really about seeing the way a situation is, taking the best action that you think you have available to you, seeing what the results are, and then repeating the process. Okay, this did this. Now let me try this. Now let me try this. And sometimes we may be able to simply within ourselves come to a place of understanding that makes it such that we don't actually have to do any external action. Like say we're dealing with a coworker or something. We may come to a place in ourselves where we're like, oh, geez, I just found out that dude, good Lord, he's going through this and he's going through this and he's going through this. No wonder he's active. We may just come to a place within ourselves like, oh, okay, geez, I had no idea. Or it could be at the opposite end of the spectrum, something where we may end up finding out, I need to leave this company. And it's really a matter of having the openness to actively work with the situation and our efforts to change the conditions of it and to see the results of those efforts and then amend as needed to find out, okay, is this increasing or decreasing my suffering? Which was the only question that really mattered to the Buddha. It's about the suffering. When I do this and I get that, has my suffering increased or decreased? How am I doing? And then based on that, we take the next step. And eventually we'll figure out what's going in the right direction as long as we maintain our seeing of it.
Basically, you want to practice on the cushion or whatever so that you become better at seeing everything clearly, but also at being more mindful when you are in difficult situation where you would tend to react and become better because you're practicing. You are becoming better at being able to see, even in a difficult situation, to see clearly, like, no, the other may not have that intention, or maybe they're suffering themselves or whatnot. And being able to develop some type of better response instead of reaction. And by improving this response that you usually have, then you become more confident in yourself, in your ability to respond instead of react. And so the fear may decrease, and then it's a bit easier to let go of anger or forgiveness.
Exactly. What you're describing there is the unraveling of the cycle of suffering. That is changing the karmic experience right there. That's exactly right. One of the things that I say constantly, and I don't know if I've mentioned it, but this is not just an on-the-cushion practice. It's meant to be taken out into life. As my first teacher likes to say, and he's not the only one, but it's just one of the best lines. If you think you have a strong practice, go have dinner with your family. The idea here isn't to get good at sitting on a cushion. The idea here is to stop suffering in our lives off the cushion. So it's exactly what you said, as we develop the skills on the cushion, because we do need someplace where we can work on this, but we take that off the cushion. Like I was saying earlier in the talk about we're each a self that's having to find a way to negotiate ourselves in a world where there's a bunch of other selves trying to do the same thing, right? And the more we clearly see that, that's one piece of wisdom, is seeing that. Once we see that, then we begin to deal with those other selves more skillfully. And we do begin to decrease our suffering. You summarized it really nicely and very neatly described how we can take a cycle of suffering and turn it around into one that decreases suffering. So yes, you definitely got it. Cheers. Thank you. We're quite a bit over, so I'm going to let it go there. Thank you all for joining me. This was really great. Really great questions today. And I hope everyone got something out of this. I certainly did. Again, if you have any questions, if you want to inquire about some one-on-one work, you've got my links in there. You can drop me a line anytime. And I hope to see you all again in a couple of weeks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks very much.
Take care.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.